after 99 years of guarding their secret formula, the formula that had built a global empire that had survived world wars, economic depressions, and countless competitors, Coca-Cola had decided it was time for a change. So, on April 23, 1985, Coca-Cola CEO Roberto Goizueta stood before the press from the company's boardroom in Atlanta, Georgia, to announce the most audacious decision in consumer goods history. With a confident smile, he declared, "We have a new taste for Coke. It's bolder, rounder, more harmonious. This is the surest move the Coca-Cola Company has ever made." Upon hearing the news, Roger Enrico, chairman of PepsiCo, smiled, then turned to his team and said, "The other guys just blinked." What happened next isn't just a story about a marketing disaster. This one has so much more. While it might begin as many corporate catastrophes do, with fear making brilliant leaders do stupid things, in this story we learn there's actually an antidote to fear. And Coca-Cola showed us how they used it to turn a disaster into one of the greatest comebacks ever. Hey everyone, I'm Terrace Wayner, and welcome to another episode of A Case Study in Corporate Fear, where I do the forensics to better understand how and why fear transforms brave leaders of thriving companies into spineless failures of corporate catastrophes, all so you never make the same mistakes. And while most know the names of epic fails like Blockbuster, Tower Records, Atari, and Kodak, what most don't know is that the true mastermind behind their collapse was fear. Today's case study analyzes how fear nearly destroyed Coca-Cola and how they became the rare company that conquered fear and turned a fiasco into triumph. But before we explore how panic nearly killed the world's most valuable brand, we need to understand the empire Coca-Cola had built before it was gaslit into believing their drink had gone flat. For over a century, Coca-Cola has been America in liquid form. Founded in 1889 by Atlanta pharmacist Dr. John Pemberton, Coca-Cola evolved from a medicinal tonic into a global symbol of optimism and prosperity. Their success became so widespread it led to a sea of imitators. Dozens of copycat beverages flooded the market with names like Coca-Nola, Ma Coca-Co, and Celery Cola, all trying to capitalize on what Coca-Cola had accomplished. Coca-Cola worried that these knockoffs were diluting their brand. So on April 26, 1915, the trustees of the Coca-Cola Bottling Association voted to spend $500 to develop a distinctive bottle for Coca-Cola. The challenge they issued to glass manufacturers across America was this: create a bottle so distinct that you would recognize it by feel in the dark or lying broken on the ground. Think about that brief for a moment. They wanted a package so distinctive that even when shattered, people would know it was Coca-Cola. When the Root Glass Company in Terre Haute, Indiana received the brief, they pulled their team together and began to work on their design. Root Glass was small, composed of C.J. and William Root, Alexander Samuelson, Earl Dean, and Clyde Edwards. Dean and Edwards went to the local library to research design possibilities. When the two came across an illustration of a cocoa bean, they noticed that it had an elongated shape and distinct ribs, and they knew they had their shape. You see, they were looking for inspiration from the ingredients in Coca-Cola's formula, but mistakenly based their design on the cocoa bean instead of the cola nut. That's right, the most iconic bottle in history was inspired by the wrong ingredient. Sometimes the best innovations come from beautiful accidents. Anyway, the design won the contest, and Root Glass Company began manufacturing the now famous Contour bottle. By 1920, the bottle was in mass production, and Coca-Cola had created something unprecedented, packaging that was as recognizable as the brand itself. The genius wasn't just in the design, it was also in the strategy. While competitors were focused on matching Coca-Cola's taste, Coca-Cola was building an unassailable moat around its brand identity. To this day, the original 1915 brief to glass manufacturers is prominently displayed on the wall of Coca-Cola headquarters as both a trophy of brilliant strategic thinking and as a teaching tool, showing employees, partners, and visitors what great creative briefing looks like and how it can create lasting results. The bottle became so iconic that noted industrial designer Raymond Loewy called it the perfect liquid wrapper. When Andy Warhol wanted to represent mass culture in his art, he painted Coca-Cola bottles. And when Volkswagen wanted to celebrate the distinctive shape of the Beetle, they compared it to the contours of the Coca-Cola bottle. But here's what made this design truly revolutionary. The contour bottle became so recognizable, it was granted a registered trademark, becoming the first packaging design in history to be awarded this designation. Coca-Cola had done something no other brand had done in history. They turned their package into intellectual property. The contour bottle wasn't just protecting Coca-Cola from imitators, it was training consumers to recognize authenticity through touch, sight, and even sound. That's right, sound. The Root Glass Company created and maintained a specific thickness to the bottle glass, so when you heard the distinctive clink of Coca-Cola bottles, you knew what you were getting. Coca-Cola had created a complete sensory experience that connected directly to American identity. And while their red and white logo is among the most recognized symbols on Earth, it is the bottle that made the experience tangible, personal, and impossible to copy. By the late 1920s, Coca-Cola was pioneering international expansion, opening bottling plants from Europe to Asia. The company understood something profound about branding that their competitors missed, and many marketers often fail to understand. It's that people don't buy what you make. They buy what you believe. And Coca-Cola believed that they weren't selling a beverage, they were selling happiness. Their advertising didn't focus on just taste or refreshment. It focused on emotion with taglines like, "The pause that refreshes. It's the real thing." And "I'd like to buy the world a Coke." These weren't just product claims, they were cultural manifestos. Then starting in 1931, their famous Santa Claus ads marketed Coke as a refreshing drink you could enjoy year-round, essentially creating the modern image of Santa that we know today. During World War II, company president Robert Woodruff made a promise that would define Coca-Cola's global dominance. Woodruff declared that every American soldier would be able to buy a Coke for 5 cents wherever they were in the world. The U.S. government even helped Coca-Cola build 64 overseas bottling plants to support the war effort. And when those soldiers came home, they had helped introduce Coca-Cola to the world. By 1945, Coke was available in 120 countries. The brand had become synonymous with American victory and optimism. The 50s and 60s represented Coca-Cola's imperial phase. They weren't just the leading soft drink, they were the only soft drink that mattered, dominating every metric from market share to distribution to cultural relevance and profitability. The company had mastered something that seemed impossible: mass production with emotional intimacy. Every Coke was exactly the same, yet consumers felt like their relationship with the brand was personal. Coca-Cola's secret wasn't just their jealously guarded formula, it was their understanding that brands exist in culture, not just in stores. By the early 1970s, they had embedded themselves deeply in the American experience while completely dominating global cola sales. But then something started to shift. Something that would awaken a fear in the C-suite of Coca-Cola's Atlanta headquarters that would nearly destroy everything. In 1975, Pepsi launched what would become one of the most psychologically devastating marketing campaigns in business history. It was called the Pepsi Challenge, and it was diabolically simple. Here's how it worked. They set up a table at malls and shopping centers with 2 unmarked cups, one containing Pepsi, one containing Coca-Cola. They then asked people to taste both and choose their favorite. And Pepsi was winning 57% of the time. But it wasn't just the results that were terrifying for Coca-Cola, it was the optics. These were dedicated Coke drinkers, people who had been loyal to the brand for decades, now publicly admitting that they preferred Pepsi, and they were doing it on camera. The Pepsi Challenge wasn't just advertising, It was psychological warfare, and it was working. The other stroke of genius was that Pepsi had a name for these converts. They called them the Pepsi generation. Pepsi's Roger Enrico explained it like this: "We used the Pepsi generation campaign to reach out not just to the young people who wanted to look forward, but to all who were curious about the next thing." While Coca-Cola had come to represent nostalgia, picnics, and small towns, Pepsi was working to position itself as the choice of youth, progress, and the future. Pepsi wasn't just competing on taste, they were competing on who was more culturally relevant. Then Pepsi doubled down and launched a bold celebrity endorsement strategy that rewrote many marketing playbooks. In November of 1983, Michael Jackson, fresh off the global success of Thriller, struck a $5 million partnership with Pepsi that shattered the record for a celebrity endorsement deal. When it was all said and done, the deal totaled more than $20 million and fully integrated the Pepsi brand into the Michael Jackson universe. This was a watershed moment for celebrity endorsement deals. Jackson didn't just get paid more than previous celebrities, he fundamentally changed what endorsements could be in terms of scale, integration, and cultural impact. According to industry executive Brian Murphy, this level of integration was unprecedented for a music artist, saying, "You couldn't separate Jackson's tour from the endorsement, from the licensing of the music, and the integration of the music into the Pepsi universe." But here's the fascinating backstory. Jackson's managers first proposed the idea to Coca-Cola. And since Coke wanted the deal really badly, they came back with an offer for $1 million. This was more than they had ever paid a celebrity, so they thought they had it in the bag. But then Jackson rejected the deal, and Coke was left speechless. And when Pepsi seized the opportunity and had Jackson moonwalk into Pepsi's new generation, Coke knew they were in trouble. The TV commercial featured a reworking of Jackson's hit track, Billie Jean. And Jackson rewrote his original chorus to now say, "You're the Pepsi generation. Guzzle down and taste the thrill of the day." Here was the biggest musical artist on the planet, rewriting the lyrics to his hit song that was originally about a stalker who had harassed and threatened him to now be about drinking Pepsi. During the filming of the commercial, a pyrotechnic malfunction occurred, and Michael Jackson's hair caught fire, resulting in second-degree burns to his scalp. Pepsi settled out of court with Jackson, and the performer donated the $1.5 million payment to the Brotman Medical Center, where the Michael Jackson Burn Center was subsequently named in his honor. The accident became part of the campaign's folklore, but it didn't stop Jackson from signing another deal with Pepsi, this time for another $10 million. After the success of the Jackson campaign, Pepsi systematically recruited the biggest names in entertainment to become the next cultural ambassadors for the Pepsi generation. They signed pop sensation Madonna and boasted that they were paying her $5 million. One ad featured Madonna's dance pop anthem titled "Like a Prayer." But the very next day, after the ad premiered, Madonna released her music video for the song. The video featured burning crosses and Madonna kissing a saint-like figure. Religious groups condemned the imagery as heresy, and churches threatened product boycotts. Within days, Pepsi announced it had banned all future broadcasts of the Madonna commercial and canceled her contract, but she kept the $5 million. It was a small price to pay for the priceless PR that the story generated. When Pepsi saw that the controversy only fueled the public's fascination with their soft drink, the trend continued. They signed Britney Spears in what was described as Pepsi's biggest and most far-reaching agreement ever with an entertainer, making her the highest-paid celebrity spokesperson at the time. Then Michael J. Fox, Ray Charles, Lionel Richie, David Bowie, and Tina Turner signed on. And later Beyoncé with a record-breaking $50 million deal. It seemed like Pepsi was recruiting every modern-day icon and turning them into weapons against Coca-Cola. Every time a young person saw their favorite artist choosing Pepsi, it sent a clear message. Coca-Cola was for their parents, Pepsi was for them. The combination of the Pepsi Challenge and the Pepsi Generation campaign was working. And for the first time in history, Coca-Cola's market share was eroding. The Pepsi challenge was proving that consumers genuinely preferred Pepsi's sweeter, more syrupy flavor profile. But what exactly were people loving about Pepsi? The answer can be found in the fundamental differences between the two formulas. First, Pepsi contained more sugar, 41 grams compared to Coca-Cola's 39 grams in a 12-ounce serving. And Pepsi's recipe included citric acid that gave it a sharper, more intense zing that hit your tongue immediately. Unlike Coca-Cola's smoother vanilla profile, Pepsi delivered what taste experts described as an upfront burst of sweetness paired with a mouth-smacking bite. This sweeter, more intense flavor profile was perfectly engineered for the sip test format. Science has shown that human taste buds naturally prefer sweeter flavors in small samples, and Pepsi's higher sugar content, combined with that citric acid tang, created an immediate sensory impact that made it the clear winner. And combine the sweeter taste with a more modern, more exciting, and more youthful advertising, and you have the liquid embodiment of the choice of a new generation. Pepsi had successfully positioned Coca-Cola as the drink of the past, while they represented the future. This created an existential crisis for Coca-Cola's leadership. They found themselves obsessed with the question, how could the world's most successful brand be losing taste tests to its primary competitor? And how could consumers who claim to love Coca-Cola actually prefer the taste of Pepsi when they couldn't see the label? Coca-Cola was spending $100 million more on advertising than Pepsi. They had twice as many vending machines, more shelf space, and better distribution. By every traditional business metric, they should have been crushing Pepsi. But what Pepsi understood was that this wasn't about business fundamentals. It was about cultural momentum. And they had just turned Coca-Cola's pristine and well-established image into a liability. The Pepsi challenge had done more than damage market share. It had infected Coca-Cola's decision-making process, and it caused Coke to spend a majority of its time thinking about how to respond to Pepsi rather than how to grow their brand. But above all, the campaign infected the psyche of the Coke leadership, making them question their inherent superiority, damaging Coca-Cola's own self-perception. For decades, they had been the unquestioned leader. And now they were seen as the company that couldn't win a simple blind taste test. Another brilliant aspect of Pepsi's choice of a new generation campaign was its surgical precision in attacking Coke's customer base. Coca-Cola agonized over the idea that its future customers were being methodically converted to Pepsi before they ever developed Coke loyalty. Another distressing thing Coke was facing was admitting their famous secret formula might be wrong. For 99 years, Coca-Cola's formula had been sacred. It was the foundation of their entire business mythology. And the idea that this formula might actually be inferior to a competitor's was unthinkable. But the results of the taste tests were clear-cut. When branding and cultural ties are removed, consumers favored Pepsi's sweeter flavor. This got Coca-Cola believing that their most protected asset could actually be its greatest weakness. But perhaps the most terrifying thing Coke leadership faced was the idea of watching Pepsi's rise and doing nothing. Coca-Cola could see a future where they gradually lost market share year by year as younger consumers chose Pepsi and older Coke drinkers aged out of the market. And they couldn't just sit back and let it happen. They had to do something. The panic attacks reached their crescendo when Coca-Cola commissioned its own taste tests to verify Pepsi's claims. They spent over $1 million conducting tests with 200,000 consumers across multiple research firms, hoping to find flaws in Pepsi's methodology. But the results came back the same every time. In each of the taste tests, consumers clearly favored the sweeter version of Pepsi over the original Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's CEO, Roberto Goizueta, kept pressing his research team, trying to uncover a flaw in the data, but there was none. The numbers were telling them something they didn't want to hear. After 99 years, their formula wasn't what the people wanted. At the same time, they were secretly conducting another taste test. They were testing a new Coca-Cola formula that was sweeter and closer to the taste of Pepsi, and people were also choosing that over their original formula in blind taste tests. Goizueta had all the data he needed to support a change. So on April 23rd, he held a press conference to announce that Coca-Cola was changing its formula for the first time in its history. The new taste would be bolder, rounder, and more harmonious, essentially sweeter and more like Pepsi. Goizueta's confidence was absolute as he said, "This is the surest move the Coca-Cola company has ever made." He went on to say that the decision was supported by irrefutable market research from hundreds of thousands of their own taste tests. He closed the press conference saying, "The consumer has spoken. We heard you, and the world is getting a new formula." But here's the thing. All of the research, including the results of the Pepsi challenge, had a fatal flaw that would become painfully obvious in hindsight. You see, these taste tests had been measuring preference for a sip or two of each cola. They didn't measure how you felt after drinking a full bottle. And they didn't measure emotional attachment. And they didn't measure brand loyalty and the deep cultural connections that consumers had with the original Coca-Cola formula. And most critically, they never once asked consumers how they would feel if the original Coca-Cola disappeared forever. Coca-Cola did consider selling both formulas simultaneously, but decided against it due to concerns from bottlers and retailers about shelf space and marketing complexity. In retrospect, this decision to go all in on a new formula was what turned a risky product launch into a corporate catastrophe. The launch campaign featured Bill Cosby as spokesperson, yet another decision that didn't age well. In an effort to highlight its improved taste, the series of ads not only celebrated the new formula, it dismissed the old one. The packaging was also redesigned with silver and red colors to signal the change. Within hours of the announcement, Coca-Cola's phones began ringing. And soon they were receiving 1,500 calls a day on their consumer hotline, and the callers weren't offering congratulations. The American public's reaction to New Coke was swift, visceral, and devastating. Consumers didn't just dislike the new formula, they felt betrayed. Coca-Cola had violated something sacred, the trust between a brand and its most loyal customers. Then it took an odd turn. People started hoarding cases of the original Coca-Cola like it was toilet paper during COVID. A man in San Antonio drove to a local bottler and bought thousands of dollars worth of old Coke. A Beverly Hills wine merchant bought 500 cases and started selling them for $150 a case and sold out immediately. A Hollywood producer rented a $1,200 a month wine cellar to store his collection of original Coke. People nationwide were stockpiling in their basements and garages, rationing their consumption of a product they loved and believed was gone forever. In an effort to protest the change, Seattle resident Gay Mullins founded the group called Old Coca-Cola Drinkers of America. The group attracted thousands of members almost immediately. Letters poured into Coca-Cola headquarters, many addressed directly to the CEO. One was addressed to Chief Dodo of the Coca-Cola Company, and it was actually delivered to Goizueta. Another person asked for his autograph because they wrote, "The signature of one of the dumbest executives in American business history would be worth a fortune someday." The media coverage was relentless and brutal. New Coke was labeled the marketing blunder of the century. Business analysts questioned whether Coca-Cola had permanently damaged one of the world's most valuable brands. But the real catastrophe wasn't the public relations nightmare, it was the sales numbers. New Coke was failing in the marketplace. Despite all the research showing consumer preference, people weren't buying it. Hidden within the taste tests was a fundamental misunderstanding about consumer behavior. Malcolm Gladwell later explained the paradox in his book, Blink. Gladwell wrote that the massive public backlash was not necessarily because New Coke tasted bad, but because it violated people's unconscious expectations and emotional relationships with the brand. That the power of rapid, unconscious decision making sometimes conflicts with more deliberate analytical decisions. And these taste tests measured people's conscious, rational responses to flavor, but failed to capture the unconscious associations and feelings that the original Coca-Cola formula had built up over decades. Also, Pepsi's sweeter formula may have been preferred in small taste tests, but when consumers drank an entire can, that sweetness became heavy, overpowering, and nauseating to some. The original Coca-Cola formula was actually better optimized for drinking a whole bottle, even if it lost in sip tests. More importantly, Coca-Cola had discovered something they never anticipated. Their brand was bigger than their product. Consumers weren't just buying a cola, they were buying a piece of American culture. And when Coca-Cola changed the formula, they were changing something that belonged to the American people, not just to the Coca-Cola company. By early July, less than 2 months after changing the formula, the writing was on the wall. New Coke was a commercial and cultural disaster that threatened to destroy 99 years of brand equity. Goizueta now faced a choice that would define his legacy: either double down on the research and give New Coke more time, or admit the mistake and bring back the original formula. What happened next was a rare recovery from a corporate catastrophe and proved that there is an antidote to fear. It's called humility. You see, when someone is in a state of fear and their actions lead to something going wrong, humility is often nowhere in sight, since ego and arrogance often grab control and double down trying to defend the mistake. But in this case, Coke did the opposite, and because of it, they didn't just bounce back, they became more popular than ever. It started with a press conference on July 10th, 1985. ABC's Peter Jennings interrupted the soap opera General Hospital with breaking news: Coca-Cola was bringing back the original formula. Goizueta stood before the media and did something that CEOs rarely do. He admitted he was wrong. Then he said, "For those who didn't like New Coke, our message to you is simple. We have heard you." He continued and explained that the original formula would return as Coca-Cola Classic, and it would be sold alongside New Coke, which would be rebranded as Coke 2. Coke 2 was then quietly discontinued. The response was immediate and overwhelming. In just 2 days after the announcement, Coca-Cola received over 30,000 telephone calls on its hotline, almost all positive. The story led national news and was printed on front pages worldwide. Coca-Cola was suddenly getting the kind of free PR that Pepsi got when they signed Michael Jackson and Madonna. They had inadvertently created a massive marketing spectacle, and now the whole world was watching their dramatic comeback and rooting for them. Even on the floor of the U.S. Senate, David Pryor called the reintroduction a meaningful moment in U.S. history. Coca-Cola had spent millions trying to compete with Pepsi's marketing machine, only to discover that their biggest marketing victory came from admitting they were wrong. Their ability to admit to its mistake and correct course quickly did so much more than lead to a recovery. It reminded Americans how much they loved the original Coca-Cola. And the threat of losing it forever had crystallized their emotional attachment to the brand. All of a sudden, people wanted to taste the beverage again and feel good about drinking it. Sales of Coca-Cola Classic soared, and the company's market share, which had been declining for years, began to recover and then surpass previous levels. By the 1990s, Coca-Cola had definitively won the cola wars. This wasn't just corporate spin. Under Goizueta's leadership, Coca-Cola's stock market value rose from $4 billion to $150 billion. His honesty and humility turned a fear-driven disaster into one of the greatest value creation stories. As you could imagine, over the years following the crisis, many had opinions on how Coca-Cola should have responded to the Pepsi challenge. Some suggested that instead of replacing the original formula, Coca-Cola should have positioned New Coke as a line extension targeting younger consumers who preferred sweeter taste profiles. Others said Coca-Cola should have tested new Coke in select markets and made a point to tell the test subjects that this would be replacing the original formula. Many feel this would have revealed the emotional backlash before it became a national crisis. Some suggested the idea that Coca-Cola could have made subtle adjustments to its formula over time, gradually moving toward a sweeter profile without announcing a dramatic change. But I feel the most poignant opinion came from an advertising exec who had worked on the Coke business for years. His brave suggestion was that Coca-Cola should have chosen to ignore the Pepsi challenge entirely, to see this and the Pepsi generation as merely an ad campaign. Coke could have then doubled down on what made them special, their cultural authority and emotional resonance, instead of trying to win taste tests in a war they didn't even start. What we all learned, along with Coca-Cola, was that taste tests don't capture brand loyalty. Sure, people might prefer Pepsi in a sip test, but that didn't mean they wanted to switch brands permanently. But we will see if the current leadership at Coke has studied their own history. Pepsi recently announced it will be reigniting the Cola Wars at the 2025 Super Bowl with a new Pepsi challenge. New Coke teaches us something profound about the relationship between fear and leadership, and how the best leaders turn fear into wisdom. Roberto Goizueta's initial mistake was understandable. Faced with declining market share and empirical evidence that consumers preferred a competitor's taste, he tried to fix the problem with data and logic. In many ways, he was doing exactly what business schools teach: gather data, test hypotheses, and make decisions based on evidence. The problem was that he was solving the wrong equation. Goizueta and his team were so focused on winning taste tests that they forgot they weren't just selling a beverage, they were custodians of an American icon. They measured preference, but not passion. Their focus was on the product, but not the brand. When the backlash hit, Goizueta faced the ultimate leadership test. He could have cited his research and demanded more time for consumers to adjust. He could have blamed the media, the competitors, or even the consumers themselves for being irrational. Many CEOs have chosen this path when faced with similar crises, letting ego override evidence. But his recovery was masterful because it was human. He admitted error quickly, took decisive action to correct it, and turned the disaster into a teaching moment of brand loyalty and consumer emotion. And because of this, Goizueta was able to reframe the narrative and label New Coke as Coca-Cola's willingness to take intelligent risks. At an anniversary celebration, he urged all employees to take similar risks in their jobs. Today, Coca-Cola remains one of the world's most valuable beverage brands, with a market cap of over $300 billion. And rather than being a black mark on the company's history, New Coke has become a testament to the power of intelligent risk-taking and graceful recovery. The most important lesson isn't just that fear makes leaders do stupid things. We've seen that story before. The lesson is that the best leaders use their mistakes to become smarter, stronger, and more connected to what really matters. That's why it's crucial to not only be on the lookout for fearful behavior in your organization, but also to build systems for rapid course correction when fear leads you astray. To recognize when data-driven decisions might be missing the human element. To see when market research might be measuring the wrong things. And most importantly, to have the courage to admit when you're wrong. Because sometimes the greatest competitive advantage comes from being the company that can say, "We heard you," and mean it. Thank you for joining us on this episode of A Case Study in Corporate Fear. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more case studies and to further understand the impact fear can have on your company, visit fear-incorporated.com. You will also find the sources and citations used to fact-check this episode.